American Airlines Flight 191 on May 25, 1979, stands as a chilling reminder of how a combination of human error, mechanical failure, and procedural shortcuts can culminate in unimaginable tragedy. And its story begins not in the air but on the ground in the bustling terminals of Chicago O'Hare International Airport, where the Memorial Day weekend had brought hundreds of travelers eager to start their vacations or return home after work, filling the airport with the excited chaos of rolling suitcases, announcements echoing over the public address system, and the hum of engines from planes taxiing and taking off. The atmosphere was typical for a holiday travel day, with families reuniting, business people rushing to meetings, and the occasional first-time flyer marveling at the immensity of the airport, unaware that this particular day would become synonymous with aviation disaster in the United States. The aircraft assigned to Flight 191 was a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, a wide-body jetliner that had been introduced in the early 1970s and was celebrated for its tri-engine design and capacity to carry hundreds of passengers across long distances with relative speed and efficiency. Although it had performed reliably in many airlines' fleets, the DC-10 had already faced scrutiny due to a handful of minor incidents, some involving engine separation warnings and hydraulic anomalies, raising concerns about structural integrity and redundancy. Yet these concerns had never escalated into a full grounding, and American Airlines had confidently scheduled Flight 191 as one of its regular services from Chicago to Los Angeles, expecting nothing more than a routine journey. The aircraft had been thoroughly cleaned and prepared the night before, but as investigations later revealed, it had undergone a critical maintenance procedure weeks earlier in which the number 1 engine and its pylon were removed and reinstalled using a method that violated the manufacturer's guidelines. Instead of carefully detaching the engine and pylon separately, mechanics had used a forklift to remove both as a single unit, a shortcut that saved time and manpower but placed unrecognized stress on the pylon's mounting points, creating microfractures that would eventually grow under the normal stresses of flight operations. This detail, invisible to passengers and crew alike, was the seed of the impending catastrophe, lying dormant in the wing structure, as undetectable to the trained eye as it was deadly. The flight crew consisted of Captain Walter Lux, a veteran pilot with more than 22,000 flight hours, known for his calm demeanor and methodical approach to handling aircraft. First Officer James Dillard, younger but highly competent, whose confidence in the DC-10 was absolute, and flight engineer Alfred Udovich, whose experience with monitoring the aircraft's complex systems provided another layer of assurance that, under normal circumstances, any anomaly could be identified and corrected. Together they boarded the aircraft with 258 passengers, along with 13 crew members, ranging from families with children clutching toys and blankets, to business executives carrying briefcases, to vacationers daydreaming about the California sunshine. The scene at the gate was lively yet ordinary, with passengers taking their seats, flight attendants performing safety demonstrations, and the hum of jet engines blending with the distant chatter of the terminal, masking entirely the mechanical fault that had been quietly growing within the left wing of the plane. Once boarding was complete, the aircraft was pushed back from the gate, and ground personnel began their checks and communications with air traffic control, relaying weight, balance, and clearance information. Taxiing to runway 32R, the pilots received routine instructions, while passengers gazed out of the windows at the orderly runway traffic, the small clusters of maintenance staff, and the expansive tarmac glistening under the spring sun. Cameras clicked in the distance as plane spotters documented yet another flight, completely unaware that these images would later serve as haunting evidence of the disaster's initial moments. At precisely 3:02 p.m., Flight 191 was cleared for takeoff. Engines surged with power as the DC-10 accelerated along the runway, its heavy fuselage trembling under the thrust of its tri-engine configuration, lifting gently yet confidently into the air. For a fleeting moment, all appeared normal, the plane rising on schedule and passengers possibly beginning to relax as the flight transitioned from taxiing to ascent. But at that critical instant, catastrophe struck. The number 1 engine, the left-wing outboard engine, violently detached from its pylon, tearing loose with immense force that ripped through hydraulic lines, severed electrical connections, and destroyed the very systems that would have alerted the pilots to the impending danger. The engine, twisting through the air, fell away toward the runway, while the plane, now without the stabilizing influence of its left wing engine and with slats that retracted automatically due to hydraulic loss, began to experience asymmetric lift, a condition where one wing produces significantly less lift than the other, causing a roll. Inside the cockpit, Captain Lux and his crew felt an abrupt jolt but initially assumed it was a standard engine failure or turbulence, because the instrumentation that should have indicated the slat retraction and hydraulic failure was itself offline, cut by the engine detachment. The aircraft started rolling left, a slow but unstoppable tilt that quickly accelerated as the imbalance in lift intensified, and the pilots struggled to correct it. The sophisticated DC-10 controls, designed to compensate for minor engine issues, were powerless against the catastrophic combination of engine loss and hydraulic system severance. Lux and Dillard attempted to raise the left wing with aileron and rudder adjustments, their hands working the controls frantically, while flight engineer Udovich monitored the indicators that now provided no usable information, all three operating under conditions that were outside any training scenario. The plane's roll increased to an alarming degree, the left wing dipping perilously close to the ground, while passengers braced, screamed, or clutched loved ones as the jet banked unnaturally and nose attitude rose too high, an aerodynamic stall beginning to take effect. From the perspective of ground witnesses, the plane's descent was horrifyingly visible. They could see the left wing tip approaching the runway almost as if the aircraft were attempting to pivot around it, with sparks and fragments trailing from the pylon area, and the right wing fighting futilely to compensate. The stall caused the plane to lose altitude rapidly. What had been a controlled climb moments earlier became an uncontrollable spiral downward. Air traffic controllers, initially attempting to communicate with the crew, received only fragmented radio transmissions, with the pilots' responses short, tense, and ultimately overwhelmed by the rapid development of the situation. Within a matter of seconds, the DC-10 struck an open field beyond the end of the runway, near a trailer park and adjacent to old hangars, impacting the earth at high speed. The fuselage disintegrated almost instantly under the tremendous force, the plane erupting into a massive fireball that engulfed everything within its immediate radius, igniting jet fuel, tearing apart seating, luggage, and aircraft metal, leaving only fragments to testify to the unimaginable violence of the crash. The fire was so intense that responding firefighters and emergency crews could do little to approach immediately. 2 people on the ground were also killed in the blast, bringing the total fatalities to 273. There were no survivors. The impact was absolute. Witnesses later recounted seeing entire sections of the aircraft ripped apart, with debris scattered across a large field and flaming sections of the engine landing far from the main wreckage, creating a scene of devastation that would haunt Chicago and the aviation world for decades. Emergency response was swift once the fire could be contained, but by then there was nothing to save. The sheer scale of the destruction marked Flight 191 as the worst aviation disaster in U.S. history, eclipsing previous accidents in both loss of life and the horror witnessed by those on the ground. The investigation that followed was exhaustive. The National Transportation Safety Board recovered the engine and pylon far from the crash site and immediately noticed the structural failure caused by metal fatigue, exacerbated by improper maintenance procedures. Investigators meticulously reconstructed the aircraft's maintenance history, discovering that American Airlines had encouraged crews to use an unofficial method of engine removal that violated McDonnell-Douglas guidelines. The method relied on forklifts to remove the engine pylon assembly together, which introduced stress fractures over repeated cycles, eventually causing the catastrophic separation during takeoff. The NTSB confirmed that no single person or act was solely responsible. It was a combination of maintenance shortcuts, mechanical vulnerabilities, and the unfortunate circumstance of this specific aircraft on that day. The crash prompted the immediate grounding of all DC-10 aircraft in the United States and led to international scrutiny, lawsuits, and profound changes in aircraft maintenance protocols. Airlines were forced to strictly follow manufacturer guidelines. Cockpit systems were redesigned to ensure independent warnings for slat deployment and hydraulic integrity, and training programs incorporated scenarios previously considered too improbable, but which Flight 191 had made horrifyingly real. The media extensively covered the disaster, humanizing the victims, interviewing grieving families, and broadcasting images of the wreckage that remain iconic in the annals of aviation history. Memorials were later established near the crash site and in Chicago, honoring the lives lost and serving as somber reminders of the high stakes inherent in air travel. The story of Flight 191 remains not only a record of loss but a pivotal lesson in aviation safety, demonstrating how small procedural deviations can cascade into catastrophic outcomes, reshaping policies, attitudes, and technologies in the decades that followed. Its legacy is embedded in every aspect of modern air travel, from maintenance procedures to cockpit alert systems, ensuring that the tragedy of May 25, 1979, continues to safeguard lives while serving as a permanent memorial to those who perished.